Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from where you have logged in from. I welcome you to our class for this month. We were meant to have this class last week, but there were other commitments that hindered us from having the class. So most welcome to our lesson today that we are going to focus on quantitative research designs. The last time we were together in our lesson 6, we were discussing paradigms. We discussed paradigms, especially in social science research. And before we went to discuss the paradigms, we talked about the components of a paradigm, or we would say the characteristics of a paradigm. And there are mainly 4. So there is the component of epistemology, that is in terms of knowledge. There is the issue of axiology, the issue of values, the issues of ontology, the issue of reality, and methodology, the issue of methods. And it is from those 4 components that we have the paradigms. So paradigms are differentiated in terms of their epistemology, in terms of their axiology, in terms of their ontology, and in terms of their methodology. And so we have 3 main, of course, there are various paradigms. And remember, we said there is none that is more superior than the other. It depends on the research question, and we'll be talking about it again today. So when you talk about positivist, when you look at its epistemology, axiology, and ontology, it is different from social constructivism. It is different from pragmatism. It is different from advocacy and all the other paradigms that you may have come across in your discipline. And it is from those paradigms that we get the 3 main approaches to research. And I say 3 main approaches because we know there are various approaches to research based on, for instance, when you say based on the purpose of research, we will talk about basic research versus applied research. So the ones we are talking about is the approach that is based on the type of data collected. And that is where we talk about quantitative, we talk about qualitative, and we talk about mixed method when you combine the 2. And as we move on with these lessons, we will be differentiating between mixed method and mixed mode research. There is a difference between the 2. But for now, our interest today is to look at now the quantitative research and the designs that help a quantitative researcher to collect the type of data collected in quantitative research. So, like we have just said, that these 3 research approaches that emanate from the different philosophical assumptions that we have mentioned, there's assumptions of epistemology, axiology, ontology, and methodology, and we discussed them last time we were together lesson 6, are the ones that brings the 3 research approaches. And these 3 research approaches that are stemming from those philosophical assumptions, they shape the way researchers answer or approach the research problem, the way they collect data, and the way they analyze it. So remember, we said each one of us, we have assumptions that we make regarding something. Where I take my children to school, where I go to the supermarket, there are assumptions that I hold. And those assumptions, they will lead me to live in a particular way or go and shop in a particular supermarket. Same case, researchers also hold those philosophical assumptions, and the assumptions that they hold shape the way in which they identify the research problem, the way they will go about addressing it, the way they will collect data, the way they will analyze it. So when we look at quantitative research, this one uses objective measurement. Remember when we were talking about the characteristics of positivism, because it emanates from positivism. We said positivists normally talk about objective reality, that it is independent of who is observing it. It is not like qualitative, which is subjective. I create my own world, or the way I view it may not be the same as the way you view it. But the quantitative researchers or the positivists, they look at reality as very objective. So that is why we are talking about objective measurement, to gather numerical data that is quantifiable. And this is the data that is used to answer research questions or the hypothesis that you may have set. And generally, quantitative research is conducted in a well-controlled setting. When we say well-controlled setting, we differentiate it with qualitative, because qualitative normally goes where the phenomena is in their natural setting. They go where the phenomena is. They do not manipulate. So if I'm conducting a quantitative research, it is possible to call my respondents in a particular place and I give them questionnaires, for instance, to respond to them. But if I'm conducting qualitative, I will go to where the phenomena is. There is no controlling the environment. It is where the phenomena is. And that is the difference between the two. And again, qualitative focuses of in-depth investigation of a phenomena, in-depth understanding. You want to have an in-depth understanding by collecting narrative data, And I want to mention something before we leave this slide. When we talk about quantitative gathers numerical data, there is students imagine that when we say numerical, it is data that is counted. Like I would say, how many females, how many males we count, 1, 2, 3, 4. How many are married? How many, when you can count. When we say numerical, we mean a variable that can be quantified. So it is the way you measure a variable that if it can be quantified, that means you can convert it into numbers. That is what we call numerical data. For instance, if I wanted to find out the causes of divorce in the contemporary society, so I can either do it through an interview, in-depth interview, or through a questionnaire. Let's look at the difference between the two. So when I give you a questionnaire that will have the question, what are the causes of divorce in the contemporary society? What will you do? You will respond the way you know, the best way you know how. Maybe you write in-laws, maybe you may explain or not. You write education, you write communication, infidelity, and any other reason you imagine is a cause of divorce. So I will collect those questionnaires and I come home and start tallying. And I will look at how many said in-laws and I will tally. There were 15. How many talked about communication? There are 10. How many said the other one? And then I convert it to a percentage. So when we meet next time, I will be telling you that in this class, 90% believe that infidelity is the main cause of divorce. So what did I do? I converted my variable divorce into numerical data. So when you talk about numerical, it is any data you collect regarding a variable that can be quantified. And I also want to mention something, that open-ended questions are not qualitative questions. They are not, based on how you use them. If there is no probing, that means in-depth investigation where you are collecting narrative, going deeper and deeper, it is purely quantitative. So when I say what are the causes of divorce, it's an open-ended question, but it is a quantitative question because I will convert that into numbers. I will convert it into numbers. The same question, I can still do an in-depth interview. What are the causes of divorce? And I will sit with a person and we have a one-on-one interview. And the person will start a story. You know, for me, I was married at this particular point. Then my mother-in-law came to live with us. Then, you know, it happened, it went. Then my husband went back to school to do a master's degree. Then when he went there, I don't know, you know, this person, you give a story which I cannot convert into any number. I cannot say that, and they said, no, I will not convert it into any number, but I'll be saying, and he said, and I write the story. So the same question can be investigated quantitatively, and the same question can be investigated qualitatively. So when we say numerical data from quantitative is when you can convert the data collected from a variable into numbers, whereas for the qualitative is normally a story, narrative. It is normally narrative, and that is what we have in this table. A few differences between quanti and quali. And of course, there are so many differences between the two, but we'll look at a few that we may refer to as we go on with this lesson. Number one is the purpose. What is the, sorry about this. What is the purpose of qualitative research? We have said it is in-depth investigation, in-depth analysis of phenomena to understand it in depth, whereas the work of quantitative is to study the cause and effect, to make predictions, to explain, to test hypotheses. That is the work of quantitative. What are the types of groups that are studied in qualitative? Normally, they are small and they are not randomly selected. They are smaller, and this group that is small is normally said to be information rich, because it is the person you want to have an in-depth understanding. So you go to that small sample that has the information. Whereas with quantitative, because normally we want to generalize to the wider population, we use a large group, and that is where we talk about the central limit theorem, who are randomly selected. And they are randomly selected so that you can have representation of the population characteristics in the sample. Then variables, qualitative studies the whole. It studies the whole, whereas quantitative picks specific variables to be studied. That is why we said it is objective, and then this other one is subjective. You know, reality is subjective, the other one is objective. So if you look at a design like biography, you are studying the person. Ethnography, studying a community, a culture. So you study it in whole. But when we come to the quantitative designs that we are going to discuss, you pick specific variables. The type of data collected, we have said, qualitative is narrative, and it is mainly in form of words, images, videos, objects, whereas quantitative is numerical. It is in numbers. It can be quantified. Form of data collected, qualitative is open-ended responses, interviews, participant observations, and we use instruments that are going to give you data that is rich. Whereas with quantitative, the instruments are structured. They are structured. The main data collection method for the qualitative, it is the researcher. So the researcher is the main instrument or the main method of data collection. Whereas at the quantitative, main one is a questionnaire. Then there is a lot of subjectivity with qualitative research. Whereas quantitative, you are supposed to be very objective, highly scientific, using scientific language. Important to state again, just like we stated at the paradigms, there is no one approach that is more superior than the other. So don't imagine but doing quantitative or qualitative, one is more superior than the other. Each one of them has got its own strength and limitations. The only thing that happens is that when you do a mixed method, you reduce the limitations of one as you increase the strength of the other. But there is none of the three, whether mixed or quantitative or qualitative, that we can say is more superior. You use what will work to provide the type of data that are appropriate for answering the research questions or solving your research problem. And that is why Johnson and this other gentleman said, when you're thinking about the approach to use, what is most fundamental is the research question. So anything else should follow the research questions in a way that offers the best chance to obtain useful and the most thorough answers. So in other words, it is your research problem that determines the type of approach that you are going to use. So none of the three, if you are to look at quanti, quali, and MM, none of the three would you say that is more superior than the other. Mixed would give you more comprehensive because you combine the two, but it still doesn't mean that it is more superior. So it is the type of data that you need, which is appropriate for the research problem, that you determine the type of approach that you are going to use. So with that introduction, we can now move to the quantitative research methods. The quantitative research methods the next week, because normally we hold our class on the first and the third Thursdays of the month. So God willing, we'll still have our class next week on Thursday. We will focus on the qualitative, a part of the quantitative and maybe the qualitative. We will have the time. So like we had earlier said, quantitative reflects positivism, philosophical assumptions. And majority of us are more inclined to quantitative than qualitative because quantitative or positivism is considered the traditional scientific method. And many researchers feel like when you're testing hypotheses, you are answering research question, you are being very systematic, generalizing it to the wider population, like you're doing a better research than when you give people stories. And that is why even when you look at government documents, they will mainly show you the progress or their performance in terms of numbers. You know, they would want to tell you how many people have been vaccinated, especially like during COVID time. You know, they would want to show you in terms of numbers. But of course, like research students that we are, you know that statistics can also be very deceiving. But all the same, people tend to identify more with numbers than a story. So if I was to give you a table that is showing the causes of divorce, written very well, in-laws 90%, communication 75%, education 50%, you know, immediately having a grasp of it will tell you what people think or feel is the main cause of divorce in our society today. But if I give you five paragraphs or a whole booklet written a story about causes of divorce, chances are you'll feel, when will I start reading all this? You know, it would have been easier if you can summarize, you know. So many of us tend to be more inclined to quantitative because of the feeling like numbers present a better method of solving a problem than the stories. But like, remember what we have said, none of the two is superior. None of the two is superior. So quantitative methods focuses on carefully measuring or experimentally manipulating a set of variables to answer theory-guided research questions and hypotheses. And we know this is what we normally do. So we identify variables that we are going to measure, or the ones we are going to manipulate if you are doing an experimental study. And these variables, they are supposed to be answering a set of research questions and testing hypotheses. So before I check whether we have any question, maybe just to remind us what is a research design. When you talk about a design, because we are going to discuss quantitative research designs, what is a design? And I have underlined the word plan because a design is a plan. It is a plan. So just like each one of us, as we set our resolutions in January of this year, you identified that probably you want to start investing or you want to have an investment worth $1,000 before the end of the year. So you came up with a plan of how you are going to achieve that. And I'm sure probably if you have not abandoned it yet, you are monitoring. You are monitoring how your plan is working. So researchers also have a plan of the type of data that they will collect to answer the research questions or test the hypothesis or answer the research problem. And that plan is what we call a research design. So designs are plans that collect either quantitative or qualitative data. It is that plan that will help you collect either numerical or narrative data. Some researchers will say it is a master plan of how and where data are to be collected. You know, when we say how and where, how, which methods, where, what is the population, you know, where it will be collected, analyzed in order to answer the research questions or test the research hypothesis. So in brief, a research design enables a researcher to determine the methods of sample collection or sample selection, instruments to use, methods of analysis based on whether the approach used will be quali, quanti, or mixed methods. And according to Kothari, I think it is 2003, I forgot to indicate that, a research design, this is just another repetition, is a plan that specifies the sources and types of information relevant to the research problem, or it is a strategy specifying which approach will be used for gathering and analyzing the data. So in general, you can see all this information is just telling us the plan that you come up with so that it can help you collect either numerical or narrative data is what we call a research design. So it helps you determine whom you will use your sample, what are the instruments you'll use, the how you will analyze the mathematics or statistic, and how you will even present your work. A research design must at least contain a clear statement of the research problem. That means there must be a correlation between a research design and the problem. The research design must be addressing the problem. It must be addressing the problem. It also must show the procedures and techniques to be used for gathering information. For gathering information, that is how you will collect information. What are you going to use? What are the methods that you are going to use? The population to be studied and how you will now sample. And then how will you process and analyze the data? So there must be that coherence in the research design and what you want to do. That is why when we say one of the characteristics of research is coherent, when you look at your title, your problem, your design, the population, there must be coherence. You cannot have a title talking about factors influencing community participation, blah, 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 and then your design becomes case study. It is not possible. If you say factors influencing, that can only be survey. And if it is survey, then it is quantitative. And if it is quantitative, then even the sampling designs will be quantitative and you'll be talking about them. Even the method of analysis will be quantitative. That means you're going to use statistics. So there must be that correlation, that coherence between the two. So before we start now looking at the designs, allow me to check whether there is any question. Mukami, hi, Prof. Hi, happy to be here. Most welcome, Ibrahim. Good afternoon, Prof. Thank you, Ibrahim. Mercy, good afternoon. Thank you, following from Kenya. Thank you, Mercy. Magda, good luck. Thank you. And Philip, love this. Thanks so much for the initiative. Thank you very much. So I don't see any question. So we will move on to look at the quantitative research designs. Quantitative research designs. And this is the chapter, this is mainly written in chapter 3, subsection 3.2 or 3.3. And it becomes 3.3 in most cases if you are required to have the paradigm before. So when you write your chapter 3, which is on research methodology, and this is mainly for social science research, when you write the chapter 3, which is research methodology, or the way you call it in your university, it could be the method section, whatever you call it, but it is where, when we talk about methodology, now this will be deviating from what you're doing. Methodology means an explanation of methods, and these methods begin from the design, the sampling, the instruments, the analysis. So when we are talking about chapter 3, of course, 3.1 is normally an introduction of the chapter. Then 3.2, if you, based on the level that you are in, you're allowed to have the research paradigm, then 3.2 will be the paradigm. So that is where you explain the paradigm that you are anchoring your study on. And then now from the paradigm, what is the design emanating from there? So what will be the research design for your study? So if you normally write the paradigm, it will be 3.2, then now 3.3 becomes the design. If not, then it means 3.1 will be introduction, 3.2 will be the research design. And when you are writing the design in chapter 3, normally you will define the design. So this study will be anchored on X design. Then look for one author. Don't write notes in your proposal or your thesis or dissertation. Don't go to all research books and start defining what is a research design. What is the X design that you are going to use. So you only need to pick one which you feel best captures what the design you are using. So for instance, this study will be anchored on survey. Then I pick a reference that is current. Remember, with the social science, the currency of the references we use should be not more than 10 years. So pick a good reference. And thank you for those who keep sharing references in our group. Pick a reference and define what is that design. Is it survey? What does person X say? Give a definition. Once you give the definition of the design, state the strength and the limitations of the design. State the limitations and the strength. Of course, you start with the strength because there is nothing that you use that will not have a limitation. So state the strength and the limitations, maybe 2 or 3, 2 strength and 2 limitations. Then after that, explain why you will anchor your study on that design despite the limitations. And if you are able, you can also show studies that have used the design. But because most of the time we have mentioned that at a statement of the problem, you don't have to repeat it again. But key things that you need to have: one, state the design you are using. So the study will be anchored on survey. Now, next, what is survey? Use a current reference to define your design and only use one. Don't copy notes. Like I have mentioned, then don't go to every research book and you are copying what is survey. From there, state the strength and the limitations of the design. At least two limitations, 2 strength. And of course, we always start with the positive. So start with the positive one: 2 strength and 2 limitations. Finally, show why you will anchor your study on the design despite the limitations. And I see many students, you will go to a textbook and you copy, for instance, what is survey. And then as you write your 3.2, then you say it will be anchored on survey because there is no manipulation of variables. And you happily add there and you want to move to the next session. What have you said? When you're telling us why you are anchoring your study on that design, what you should write is how that design is related to your problem. It is not what Wabogo has written, that survey, there is no manipulation. That does not tell us why you have anchored it. You always think about your research problem. And now you bring in the fact that survey because probably it is used to generalize. I'm just using an example. It is the best design for this study because this study, which investigates X and Y, aims to generalize the findings to the wider population, blah, blah, blah. Don't forget to relate it to the research problem. You relate it to the research problem. So even as you read, you want to write why you are anchoring your study on it, please do not forget that. So those are 4 key points that you need to note as you write the research design, as you write your 3.2. And it is the same thing you do even as you write the paradigm. Even as you write the paradigm, if the level that you are in allows you to or requires you to have a 3.2, which is research paradigm, it is the same. So you state the paradigm that you are anchoring your study on. What are the proponents? What are the tenets of the paradigm? What does the paradigm say? Of course, define the paradigm. What are the tenets of the paradigms? What are the strengths and the limitations? Why are you anchoring your your study on the paradigm? Again, related to the research problem. So when we talk about quantitative research designs, there are 2 types of quantitative research design. We have non-experimental designs, and this includes survey and ex post facto or causal comparative research. And then we have experimental, which includes the true and quasi. So if your problem needs to be answered by quantitative research, then you draw your designs from these 3. So there is survey, and ex post facto. Those are non-experimental. And then there is the experimental, which can either be true and quasi. And we will be discussing first the non-experimental designs. And when we say non-experimental, it means we are not measuring the cause and effect. We are not measuring the cause and effect. And you'll be explaining that so that you see the difference between the experimental and the non-experimental. So we start with the survey design. And this is the most common one. This is the most common one. Many a times, especially if you are doing a SIGO mode research, mainly, like I said, because many of us are inclined to quantitative, we normally tend to do a survey. And I would also want to mention something. Survey does not mean questionnaire. People who work with the NGOs or who work in projects, we normally misuse this word called survey. And we use survey to mean questionnaire, And of course, even me, if I go to do a consultancy job, I will follow suit. But you, as students of research, you need to be sure that survey is a design. Questionnaire is an instrument. So please don't put in your academic document that you will use survey to collect data. Survey is not an instrument. Survey is not a method of data collection. Survey is a design. And I know people, especially who work in NGOs, they are not able to unlearn. They are not able to unlearn when they come to an academic class. But please, because we all need to get our degrees and we also want to do good work, just note that when you're talking about survey is not questionnaire. That is the real thing. But of course, when we go to do our consultancy and we are told you shall use survey, just know you are being told you'd use a questionnaire. And the reason why people normally use the 2 terms interchangeably is because the main instrument that is used in survey is questionnaires. So that is where that challenge came from. So they relate the instrument to the design. So what is a survey or what is survey design? So survey research is that type of research that aims to describe the population attitudes, opinions, trends by studying a sample to generalize from the sample to the population. And you can see this is mainly what we normally do, that we would want to generalize to the wider population. So survey will help us to describe. It is a descriptive. It is a descriptive. And something else I would want to mention. There are people who will talk about descriptive design, and they mean survey. Descriptive is a method of analysis. When we get there, we shall be talking about the two types of statistics or analysis, descriptive and inferential. So there is no design called descriptive. What again came about is that because survey is a descriptive, it aims to describe. So again, people started talking about survey and descriptive as the same. So design is not called descriptive, it is called survey, but it aims to describe the population trends and attitudes and opinions of a population, where you study a sample and you study that sample using questionnaires or structured interviews. Structured interview means there is no probing, there is no in-depth. Structured interview are actually questionnaires administered orally. So there is no probing, because when you probe, now it becomes qualitative, and survey is quantitative. The purpose of survey is to answer a question, a research question or questions about variables of interest. So when we do survey, we must have identified our variables. And we have three types of survey. We have correlational survey, cross-sectional survey, and longitudinal survey or longitudinal studies. And when we do survey, it helps us to answer three types of questions. And the three types of questions are descriptive, relationship, and predictive. So we have descriptive, relational, and predictive. That is what survey helps us to do. That is what it helps us to do. And I have an example. A descriptive, what is descriptive? What is the influence of capacity building on the implementation of community projects? That is a research question that is descriptive. Relational. Is there a relationship between capacity building and implementation of community projects? That is a question of research. And I know those who have not been missing class or who had the time to attend lesson 3, we discussed research questions, and we differentiated between a research question and a question of research. So in case you didn't attend, it is on YouTube. You can easily access it. Predictive. What is the amount of capacity building that can predict implementation of community projects? That is a research question. Or does capacity building predict greater implementation of community projects? That is a question of research. So such type of questions, we answer them using survey. So descriptive, relational, and predictive. In a video, I said, what is the relationship between capacity building and implementation of community projects? That is a research question that is relational. So that is the work, that is what survey will help us to do. Some of the characteristics of survey. Number one, sampling is often done for a large population. And remember, central limit theorem. So a sample of 30 plus. So when we are using survey, it must be a sample that is drawn from a large population. And I know in research, we need to have a clear definition of the word. When I say large, what is large? This means a population that will give you a sample of at least 30. Why? Because we know that that is the only way we can do meaningful statistics. So if you're doing a sample, if you're doing statistics of less than 30, then you will get statistics that will be a bit misleading. So that is why there is a central limit theorem. So sampling is often done for a larger population. You draw a sample using random sampling. The other characteristic is that it generalizes results obtained from a sample to represent a population. So we study a small sample so that we can generalize to the wider population. And let me just make a clarification. I know many of us, especially probably at the undergraduate level, when we are doing our projects, And because many of us use a survey, you normally talk about generalizing the findings to the wider population, yet your analysis is only descriptive. Now, descriptive statistics describes the sample. So the work of descriptive is to just describe the sample. You cannot generalize unless you have conducted inferential statistics. So you cannot generalize results from a sample to the population unless you have conducted inferential statistics, because it is inferential that helps you to predict the population parameter from a statistic. And I know we will discuss that more with those who are attending SPSS class that we have pushed to 4th of July. We were supposed to start today. So if you have not yet registered for the physical SPSS class and you would be interested, please go to the website and register. We will be starting the class on Thursday next week at 7 p.m. East African time. Number 3, data is collected through questionnaires, all structured schedules, and also tests and examinations. We had mentioned this. These are instruments that will not allow you to probe. They will not allow you to probe. There is no probing. It is not like interview guide. This one is interview schedule, structured interview. Variables of interest are measured numerically. We explained that once you collect data concerning a variable, you convert it into numbers. You convert it into numbers. And then many responses can be obtained, especially where survey is administered online. Then before I check on any questions, we look at the types of survey. We had mentioned the 3. We have cross-sectional. So when you hear of cross-sectional, you think about time. Cross-sectional is equals to time. Correlational is equals to relationship. Longitudinal is equals to follow-up. So that is how you remember the 3. So cross-sectional is survey administered at a point in time. At a point in time. So it is when we want to describe the population at a particular point in time when you have administered the survey. Correlational is when you want to determine relationship between 2 or more variables within a population. And remember, correlation does not mean cause and effect. So correlation just tells us variables are related. Variables are related. When we calculate the correlation coefficient and we get plus 0.9, we can say there is the strong positive linear relationship between X and Y, but it doesn't mean X causes Y. So correlational, there is no cause and effect. There is no cause and effect. So correlation just tells us that 2 variables are related. Research and statistics have a relationship. So even if we were to measure the relationship between the 2 and we look at the performance in research and statistics and we find it is high, it does not mean research causes good performance in statistics or vice versa. No, it's just telling us that there is a relationship that occurs between the 2. And that is why even when you are doing correlation, when you're doing Pearson product moment correlation coefficient, there is no independent and dependent variable. There is no independent dependent because these 2 variables, none is influencing the other. Then longitudinal is follow-up. Is follow-up. It enables a researcher to make observations regarding a sample or a population over an extended period of time. So you are studying it now, maybe after 3 months, another 3 months, another 3 months, or 1 year or 6 months. And this is what mainly people in medical field will also use this, when they have a group of people, for instance, before a vaccine is released to the whole population. So they will have a group of people whom they will follow up, administer and then follow up, look at effects, move on like that, and then they will now, before they can release it to the wider population. And we also have types of longitudinal survey, and one of them is trend analysis methods, which investigates how a population being studied changes over time. How a population being studied changes over time. For instance, if let's say, like, if I am teaching education course, for instance, we may want to see at the University of Nairobi, how has the population that is enrolling for Bachelor of Education, Science or Arts changing over time? So we will keep studying the population that comes, or the students who enroll this year and next year, maybe for the next 5 years. So you have variables that you want to study in terms of their interest, in terms of their maybe demographics, in terms of where they are coming from, so that you can see whether there is a change in the population. So you can do it for a period of time. Now, with the cohort method, which is similar to the trend, the same population is involved, but a different sample. So people who have enrolled for BEd arts, for instance, in the academic year 2023-2024. So there were 1,000 of them. So you pick up a sample this particular time, you pick a sample, then after maybe another time, you pick another sample from the same population. So you are using the same population, but a different sample is selected at different periods of the survey. So remember the first one, you are looking at how this population is changing. So those who come up 2023, 2024, 2024, 2025 academic year, 2025, 2026, maybe you'd go on studying for the next 5 years. But with the cohort, the people who have the same or similar characteristic are studied over time. So the group that came in 2023, 2024, you keep picking a sample at different times so that you can study whatever you wanted to study. Panel method, the same sample is used at different times, the same sample. So the group, for instance, who will be graduating now, maybe you want to study how they are in the job market after 3 months, after another 3 months, after another, it is the same sample that you are going to study. That is the panel method. Now, before we go to the ex post factor, let me just check whether there is any question. I think I'd gone up to Philip. Thank you. Wario, glad to be here. Thank you. Mashak, I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, from Nigeria. I'm glad to be here. Most welcome. Watching you from Ghana. Happy to join this class for the first time. Thank you very much. Essie, we have had 7 lessons. We normally meet on the first and the third Thursdays of the month. But last week we didn't meet because of another commitment. So be on the lookout. Nathaniel, good to be here. Most welcome. ISO, educative, appreciate. Julius Amrotich, my research is influence of migration policies on human in Garissa, Kenya. Question, what is the best design? By just reading that, Julius, that should be survey or mixed method, in case you know how to use the mixed method. Please, Mahame says, please, Prof, what type of data falls under cross-sectional survey? Is time series part? No. Mahame, what we mean by cross-sectional by time, it is when it is being conducted. But the type of data that you collect using cross-sectional, it is numerical. It is numerical, and we have said you normally use questionnaires, and you also use structured interviews. There is no much probing. But you can also do a mixed method of the two. So where quantitative, when you'll be talking about mixed method, you will understand how we the characteristics that we use to differentiate the two in terms of time and weight. Which one you take more time and which carries more weight? Is it the quantity or the quality? And many a times quantity, because we know many of us are so oriented toward quantitative. Many a times quantitative carries more weight than the qualitative, but we'll discuss it when we deal with mixed method strategies that we use, or the designs that we use at the mixed method. So the next non-experimental design is ex post facto, and it's also similar to causal comparative design. Ex post facto. Now, when you say ex post facto, you mean after the fact. After the fact. So it tells you something has already happened, and now you are going back to ask yourself, why did it happen? Now, think about how you go to hospital. So you go to hospital when there is a disequilibrium in your body. So assume you have a stomach ache. So you have had the stomach ache for 2 days. So when you go to hospital, the doctor will start asking you from when, what did you eat, or what do you think caused the they'll start going back trying to find out what may have brought about this particular challenge. So ex post facto is an after the fact design. It is after the fact design. Why? Because you study after an effect on the variable has occurred. So, and I have underlined the word causes because the word cause, cause and effect have a very strong meaning in research. But I have used it so that we can explain, and so that we can also explain why it is similar. It normally mimics experimental. So something has already happened. So we are asking ourselves, what could be the cause? What are the factors that brought it? So this cause, I have underlined it. It should also be in quotes because it is not really what caused it. Because when we discuss experimental, we will be talking about how do you ensure causality? How do you ensure causality? So the researcher in an ex post facto design is when they are investigating a problem by studying the variables in retrospect. So students have already performed very well. What may have brought about these good results? So you are going back. So you are going to study the variables in retrospect so that you find out what may have brought about this. So in this design, changes in the dependent variable are observable. So you can already see the change, just like you are going to hospital when you are already having a stomach ache, when you already have a problem. So you as the doctor, the concern is what brought about this stomach ache. So in research, the main concern of the researcher who uses ex post facto is to determine the factors that brought in the changes. This method is adopted instead of experimental because many of the cause and effect relationships under study do not permit experimental manipulation. So what are we saying? That researchers adopt this method instead of experimental. And why are we saying instead of experimental? Because it mimics experimental when we are asking about what may have brought in the change. Because many of the things that we'd want to study will not allow experimental manipulation. The question is why? And I will explain 2 reasons. Number 1, the researcher deals with already formed groups. And with experimental, you are the one who is supposed to form the group. So with ex post facto, the researcher does not form the group. They already deal with already formed group. So what does that mean? If, for instance, I wanted to do a research on effectiveness of a teaching resource to the performance of students in basic education. So you want to find out, now that the government has introduced a new mathematics book, what are the changes that this book has brought? That is what I want to study. I will go to schools that have already identified or the book is being used in already formed classes. I am not the one who will go and tell them, this class use the old book and this class use the new one. Then I can compare the two. I will go to already formed group. I cannot manipulate the groups. They have already been formed. So the other point is the differences between these groups will not be brought about by the researcher. because he or she is not the one who is manipulating it. They have already been formed. That is why we are saying that it is adopted in place instead of experimental, because many of the cause and effect relationships under study, they do not permit experimental manipulation. So we had mentioned this, that ex post facto mimics an experiment in that comparisons are made between two or more groups of individuals with similar backgrounds who were exposed to different conditions. Then the cause and effect of the relationship between two or more groups is then established. What are we saying? That ex post facto mimics, or it tries to look like, but it is not. It tries to look like an experimental design because you compare two groups. But remember, these groups, you are not the one who formed them. You go when it has already been formed. So you are going to two or more groups with similar backgrounds, but were exposed to different conditions. You are not the one who came up with the condition. Maybe I would want to give an example. If I wanted to find out if soft drink cause weight gain, I will identify my group, 50 people here and 50 people here. This is just an example. And then one group, you take the soft drink for 1 month without taking anything else. And the other group, you take water and tea and whatever else. And initially, I would have taken their weight. So I know probably all of them are 50 kgs. Then after 1 month, I will measure their weight again. So if these people who are taking sodas or soft drink probably have changed in their weight, I can now confidently say that soda causes weight gain. And of course, even with this one, like we shall see, needs the elimination of all extraneous variables. It is not as simple as just saying, because there has been a change in weight, then soda causes weight gain, But that example is to differentiate between ex post facto and experimental. So here, you are the one who has formed the groups and you have brought in the intervention. Now, with the ex post facto, you are not the one who forms the group. You already go when people they have increased in weight or they are already obese. So you are going back to ask yourself, what may have caused this? And maybe you identify soda as one of them. So the groups that you use in ex post facto to compare, you are not the one who formed them. And that is why ex post facto is not experimental, or it doesn't take the format of experimental. Even this one, you are not able to control for extraneous variables, because already the fact has happened. That is why we are saying it is after the fact. So what we have said is that the ex post facto or causal comparative attempts to study the cause or the reason. So this cause is in quotes for pre-existing differences in groups. So why do we have what we can see? Why? You go back. Limitations of this design. One, the researcher has no control of the groups because you are going after the fact. You are going after the fact. And that is why even in medicine, we normally hear of misdiagnosis, because you see, you are going after the fact. So the doctor is trying to take his mind back. What could have happened? What could have brought this? Sometimes they are not God. So sometimes they make mistake and you are given drugs for what you are not suffering from. Number two, another limitation, the cause and effect relationship may not be what it seems to be. It may be a spurious relationship. Now, when we talk about a spurious relationship, is when two variables appear. They appear to be correlated, but it could just be coincidental, purely coincidental. Like, for instance, increase in the higher education fees and increase in the living conditions. Those two may have no relationship at all, but you may find that you have high living conditions and still high fees, high university fees. That is a very spurious relationship. It's not like demand and supply. So even if you imagine there is a relationship, it may be very coincidental. It just happened that at this particular time, there was an increase in higher levels, I mean, in higher education fees, and so the living conditions are very high. Results are tentative because the cause and effect relationship may be reversed. And this is because of number 2. If you realize that the relationship was spurious, then chances are you would need to do the study again. It can be reversed because there was no real relationship between the two. To yield satisfactory results, repeated measures may be required. That means it is a study that you would need to do time and again so that you can really identify whether a relationship exists. There are people who confuse causal comparative because of the issue of comparing with correlational. Are they the same? No, they are not the same. Remember, correlational is correlational survey that identifies the relationship between variables, but causal comparative identifies relationship between groups. So when I go to class A and B to find out the change in the teaching method that is being used, though that I am trying to find out the relationship or the differences or the cause of the change I can see between groups. But correlational is between variables. Causal comparative uses categorical or variables, be it dependent or dependent. Correlational, mainly it is continuous, quantitative variables. Causal comparative provides better evidence of cause and effect. Again, this should be in quotes, than correlational. Because you see, with causal comparative, you are taking yourself back to ask yourself what may have brought in the change, what may have caused this change. And then finally, it is the experimental design. Before that, let me just see whether there is any question. James says, lovely lecture. Thank you very much, James. Following from Zambia, that is James. Following from Malaysia, be blessed. We're pushing the research industry. Thank you, Weekly. Wonderful lecture. Listening from Kenya. Thank you. Nancy, glad to be here. Okay. You taught me in 2022. Oh, great. Good to see you, Nancy. Arnold, learning a lot. Thank you, Prof. Thank you very much for your kind comments. So, we have said that quantitative designs are categorized into 2. We have non-experimental and we have experimental. Non-experimental are survey and ex post facto. And then experimental are true and quasi. There is a whole theory regarding experimental design. And so I didn't want to combine it with these other 2. So next week, God willing, on Thursday, we shall start discussing experimental design. That will be where we shall start because there is a lot that we need to do about experimental, including the issues of internal and external validity and how we control for extraneous variables. So this information and much more is available in my book, which you can buy through the website. And I've given the website. Again, the free lessons on YouTube. My YouTube channel is called Research Methods Class. Please make sure that you subscribe to the channel and you access the free lessons. And I hope we are in the group where we receive information on what is happening. So thank you so much for your time here. I hope we have learned. I hope now we can now differentiate between survey and ex post facto. So until Thursday, God willing, and I'll share in the group, have a good time wherever you are watching us from. Thank you and God bless you.